Jeremy Wolf is the kind of man who built empires from late nights and takeout orders. As the CEO of a nationwide food delivery app, success is measured in efficiency, speed, and scale. But one rainy afternoon, a simple lunch order sets in motion the one thing he never optimized for: regret. When two twin boys show up at his office to deliver a chicken pot pie, Jeremy barely glances at them, until he sees the faded logo on the takeout box: Lena's Kitchen, a name he hasn't heard in over a decade, a place that once felt like home, and a woman, a chef, he walked away from in pursuit of greatness. Driven by a gnawing instinct, Jeremy tracks down the address. The small restaurant is still standing, barely. Inside, a woman wipes flour from her cheeks as she serves plates and stirs pots, all while keeping an eye on the same twin boys now doing homework in the corner. But the biggest surprise isn't that Lena remembers him. It's what she never told him. What happens when a man who's mastered the market is forced to face the pieces of a life he left behind? Can an empire builder learn to cook, and more importantly, to care? Stay with us to see how one forgotten meal becomes a recipe for redemption. Subscribe now and don't miss a single chapter of this unforgettable journey. Jeremy Wolf had never cared much for lunch. To him, meals were just fuel, pit stops between meetings, deals, and strategy sessions. As the 49-year-old CEO of Grub Nation, a food delivery empire with millions of users nationwide, Jeremy had turned convenience into a billion-dollar commodity. He didn't savor food. He streamlined it. But today, something felt different. In a rare decision to personally test the company's latest hyper-local delivery initiative, Jeremy had ordered from a random restaurant on the new beta system. No assistants, no filters. Just him, a chicken pot pie, and 30 minutes of silence before the next quarterly war room. He tapped refresh on the delivery tracker. Your order is on the way. Outside his floor-to-ceiling window, the Chicago skyline gleamed under an early spring sun. Far below, streams of delivery drivers zipped through traffic on electric bikes and scooters, soldiers in the logistical army he'd built from the ground up. He stood with his hands in his pockets, suit jacket unbuttoned, trying to remember the last time he felt anything close to hunger that wasn't ambition. A soft knock. Jeremy opened the door himself, a rare breach of habit, and paused. Two boys stood there, around 8 or 9, identical in height and features. Big eyes, windswept dark hair, matching oversized hoodies, one of which read Lena's Kitchen. "We have your pot pie, sir," one said politely, holding up the paper bag with both hands. The logo stamped on the front was faded, but unmistakable. Jeremy's heart stuttered. He took the bag slowly, mouth dry. "Lena's Kitchen?" he asked, voice quieter than intended. The boys nodded. "That's our mom's restaurant." A sound like rushing air filled his ears. He barely managed to thank you as the twins turned and jogged back toward the elevator, the smaller one waving before the doors closed. Back at his desk, Jeremy sat down heavily. The room felt too quiet, too still. Lena's Kitchen. The name hit him like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just some old restaurant. It was her restaurant. Lena Dawson. The woman who had once filled his apartment with the smell of garlic and fresh basil. The woman who had taught him how to dice onions and burned toast because they were kissing too much. The woman he had loved, truly, selflessly, for 2 years. Before walking away with a signed lease in San Francisco and a startup dream he told himself couldn't include her. She'd started Lena's Kitchen during their final year together, a little storefront with the chipped windows and an open kitchen concept. Jeremy had helped install shelves, had built the website, had promised to come back after launch season. He never did. Now, more than a decade later, her name had resurfaced on a takeout bag held by twin boys with eyes too familiar to ignore. He opened the bag slowly. The scent of roasted chicken, Buttery crust and herbs rose up, wrapping around him like a memory. He stared at the logo again. The font was still the same, handwritten script like her old menu cards. His hand trembled slightly. She still had the restaurant. After all these years, she was still cooking. And those boys. "That's our mom's restaurant." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling shakily. He hadn't thought about Lena in years, not in any real way, but now his mind was full of her laugh, the way she wiped her hands on her apron, the sound of her humming while she stirred sauces, and her tears. The last time they'd spoken, Lena had been crying. "I don't need the company, Jeremy. I need you." He had looked away, unable to say what he really felt, that he was afraid that love wouldn't survive the grind, that he'd lose everything if he didn't move on. "I'll come back," he had said, but he never did. And now, those boys, twins. Jeremy's chest tightened. He did the math in his head. They looked about 8 or 9. That would place their birth right around the time he left Chicago. He stood up abruptly, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and disbelief. Could they be his? Could Lena have raised them alone? A part of him wanted to dismiss it. Coincidence, a name, a mistake. But the look in the boys' eyes, the shape of their faces. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to the delivery confirmation. There it was. Order prepared by Lena's Kitchen. Address 1629 W. Elmdale Ave. Still in Chicago. Still real. Jeremy grabbed his keys. The Empire could wait. He had to know. He had to see her. Again. After all this time. Jeremy Wolfe had driven past the turn 3 times before he found the right block. Elmdale Avenue had changed over the years. Like most of the city's older neighborhoods, it bore the wear and resilience of time. Rusted signage, potholes patched too many times, a mom-and-pop laundromat, a shuttered bookstore with faded "For Lease" lettering in the window. He parked on the street and cut the engine, but made no move to get out. The smell of the pot pie still lingered faintly in the air, and his thoughts spun in rhythm with the ticking of the dashboard clock. He'd been in a dozen boardrooms this week, closed 2 major contracts, and navigated the press after a data breach scare. None of it had unsettled him like this. A flicker of motion pulled his gaze to the storefront across the street. There it was, Lena's Kitchen. The sign above the window was cracked but intact, the same handwritten cursive. The paint had chipped in places, but the heart behind it hadn't faded. A small chalkboard leaned against the wall. Today's special, chicken pot pie, $6.50 with lemonade. He blinked hard. She was still making it. Jeremy crossed the street, his steps hesitant. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, releasing a familiar aroma of onions caramelizing and butter and rosemary thick in the air. A sound that had once felt like home echoed behind the counter. Lena's laughter. He froze. She was there, behind the counter, apron smeared with flour, hair tied in the same loose bun she used to wear when she was in the zone. She was older now, of course, but so was he. Her face was thinner, tired maybe, but her eyes still had that fire, and when she turned and saw him, everything stopped. Lena blinked. The ladle in her hand paused mid-stir. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, quietly, she set the pot down. "Jeremy?" she said. Not angry, not surprised, just still. He swallowed, voice low and hoarse. "Hey, Lena." Her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall, then back to him. "You're a little late," she said gently. "About 10 years." He gave a sheepish smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was in the neighborhood." "You ordered pot pie," she said, not as a question. "Yeah." A beat of silence. Then her lips curved upward slightly. "Still your favorite?" "It never stopped being," he admitted. Behind her, a timer beeped. She turned it off, mechanically wiping her hands on a towel. "I have customers." "I won't stay long," Jeremy said quickly. I saw the logo. The boys delivered, and I thought—" "You thought what?" she interrupted, her tone calm but firm. "That after vanishing without a goodbye, you'd walk in here and—" "What, exactly?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He hadn't rehearsed this part. He hadn't expected it to feel like this. "I didn't know," he said instead, his voice faltering. "I didn't know you still had this place. That you were still—" He stopped short, his gaze drifting to a framed photo near the register. 4 faces, the twins, standing in front of the restaurant, holding a sign. Lena's Kitchen, open Saturdays. His heart jumped. Lena followed his gaze. "Those are my boys," she said softly. "Twins?" he asked, breath catching. "Yes. And are they—" He couldn't finish the question. The weight of it sat between them like a wall. Lena's expression didn't change, but her voice grew quieter. "You walked away, Jeremy. The day I needed you most. You chose your next investment." He stared at her. "You were pregnant?" "I was terrified," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "I thought you'd come back. I thought maybe— if I just waited. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into a year. You were gone, and I had no way to reach you." He stepped forward instinctively. "I didn't know, Lena. I swear. If I'd known—" "You would have what?" she cut in. "Married me out of guilt? Put me and 2 babies in a condo while you worked 18-hour days?" "No," he said softly. "I would have tried." She looked at him then, really looked, and her voice broke just a little. "They don't need a CEO. They need a father." Jeremy stood still, the truth hitting him with quiet devastation. He turned to the photo again. The boys, his boys. "I'd like to try," he said, barely above a whisper. Lena folded her arms, her jaw tight. "We'll see," she said. "They don't know who you are, and I'm not sure I want them to, yet." He nodded, not expecting forgiveness. But just before he turned to leave, Lena added quietly, "Come back tomorrow. We could use a hand with the dishes." It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was something. Jeremy stepped into the sunlight, the door jingling shut behind him. For the first time in years, he didn't check his phone. He didn't think about numbers, growth charts, or press releases. Tomorrow, he was washing dishes. And maybe, just maybe, earning his way back to what he lost. Jeremy returned the next morning before the sun had fully warmed the street. He wore jeans and a simple navy sweatshirt, the kind Lena used to say made him look too Ivy League casual back when they were young and in love. As he stood outside Lena's kitchen, the sign flickering with age but still standing proud, he noticed the boys first, his boys. They were carrying a box of canned goods from a dented delivery van parked out front. The same twins who had delivered the chicken pot pie. They worked in sync, one lifting while the other steadied, speaking in a rhythm that came only from years of knowing exactly how the other moved. He stood silently, watching. Then Lena emerged, holding the door open with her hip. Her gaze found him immediately. "You're early," she said. "You said you needed help with dishes," Jeremy replied, offering a tentative smile. She hesitated a moment before nodding toward the back. "Dishwasher's to the left, aprons hanging on the hook. Let's see if your hands can survive hot water and steel wool." As Jeremy stepped past the boys, one of them gave him a suspicious side glance. "You're the guy from yesterday," the taller one said. Jeremy turned to them, nerves tightening in his chest. "I guess I am." Lena stepped in, sensing the tension. "Boys, this is—" Jeremy. He's helping today. The shorter twin tilted his head. Like a volunteer? Lena glanced at Jeremy, then answered carefully. Like someone trying to make himself useful. The boys didn't press further. Instead, they resumed unloading supplies, their chatter soft but lively. Jeremy followed Lena inside, ducking his head slightly to hide the emotion welling behind his eyes. The kitchen was small, worn in places, but still held that unmistakable Lena aura, organized chaos with a heart. Chopping boards lined the counter. A simmering pot of soup sent steam curling into the air. The smell of fresh dough mingled with herbs, making the place feel like memory wrapped in morning light. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Lena said, not looking at him as she tied her apron. "Most men would have taken my words yesterday and walked away." "I almost did," Jeremy admitted, tying his own apron clumsily. "But then I remembered what it used to feel like, to stand in your kitchen, and I figured if I can close billion-dollar deals, I can scrub a few pans." A small smile tugged at her lips before she caught it. Scrubbing is only the beginning. They worked in companionable silence for the first hour. Jeremy washed, Lena prepped. Occasionally she'd pass behind him with a quiet, hot behind, or reach for something just past his elbow. It was easy to forget a decade had passed, until he asked carefully, "What are their names?" She didn't answer right away, just kept chopping parsley. "I met them yesterday," he continued, voice softer. "But I didn't know what to call them. I didn't know if I had the right to ask." Lena exhaled slowly, her hands pausing mid-motion. Then she spoke, each name like a secret finally being shared. "Eli and Noah." Jeremy repeated them quietly. Eli and Noah. "They're 9. Birthdays in November. They like old cartoons and peanut butter on everything. Eli reads 3 grades ahead, and Noah can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute." He turned, drying his hands on a towel. "They're mine, aren't they?" Lena finally met his gaze, and what he saw there was a mix of exhaustion and quiet defiance. "They're ours," she said, "but they don't know that." Jeremy felt the words like a blow. "Why?" "Because when I realized I was pregnant, I also realized I was alone. And when you didn't come back, I told myself I'd never let them grow up wondering why their father didn't choose them." He opened his mouth to protest, but she stopped him with a glance. "You didn't choose me, Jeremy. And back then, that was enough." Silence settled between them, thicker than the steam rising from the soup. He stepped closer, his voice heavy. "I never knew. I didn't get letters. I didn't get calls." Lena studied him for a moment. "Then maybe life failed both of us." Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The twins entered, each carrying a bag of flour. "Need help with dough, Mom?" Eli asked. Lena smiled at him gently. "Sure, honey. Put it near the counter." Jeremy bent slightly, meeting them at eye level. "Hi, Eli. Hi, Noah. I'm Jeremy." They both looked at him, curious but cautious. "You're not from the food app company, are you?" Noah asked. Jeremy laughed, softly. "I guess I used to be." "And now?" Eli raised an eyebrow, sharper than his age should allow. Jeremy looked toward Lena, then back at the boys. "Now I'm learning how to knead dough." The boys shared a look only twins could understand. Then Noah shrugged. "Okay, just don't burn the crust." Eli added, "And don't touch the sauce. That's Mom's job." Lena chuckled behind them, and for the first time in a very long time, Jeremy felt something inside him shift. Not regret, not guilt. Hope. And this time, he didn't plan to let it go. Jeremy returned the next day, then the day after that, and every day that followed. He didn't announce his visits, he just showed up. Quietly. Purposefully. Always slipping through the side door of Lena's kitchen by 7:30 a.m., in jeans, boots, and the same navy hoodie. It was the only routine in his life that didn't involve market trends, board meetings, or logistics dashboards. And, strangely, it was the one that felt the most real. Lena had stopped asking why he was there. She simply handed him an apron and pointed to the day's chaos. Piles of dishes, crates of onions, lunch prep lists scribbled on notepad paper, always scrawled in her handwriting, firm and fast, like she didn't have time to waste on making things pretty. The restaurant itself was a shadow of its former self. The once bright Lena's Kitchen sign out front buzzed erratically. The paint was chipped, the stools at the counter wobbled, and the cash register stuck every third transaction. But somehow, the place still breathed. Eli and Noah arrived every afternoon after school, dropping their backpacks with practiced thuds and diving into whatever needed doing, folding napkins, labeling takeout containers, or helping their mom stir pots in the back. They moved through the narrow aisles of the kitchen like they'd been born in it. In a way, they had. On the fifth day, Jeremy offered to take the trash out back. He stepped into the alley behind the building and froze. The faded brick wall, the rusting dumpster, the graffiti tagging, everything was the same as it had been 9 years ago. This was where Lena had kissed him for the first time. They'd snuck out back during a late shift, laughing over a burnt lasagna he'd ruined trying to impress her. She'd wiped tomato sauce off his cheek with a napkin and kissed him under the flickering alley light. He'd been 30 then, just beginning his climb, just dumb enough to think ambition came with unlimited time. A clatter from the kitchen snapped him back. He re-entered to find Lena sweeping up a broken plate. "It slipped," she muttered. "Let me—" Jeremy reached for the broom. "I got it," she said quickly, her eyes not meeting his. "You should check the oven timer." He hesitated, then nodded. But something had shifted. Later, when the boys had gone home with a neighbor and the dinner crowd had slowed to a trickle, Jeremy leaned against the prep table, watching Lena dice carrots with exacting care. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. Her knife slowed. "About them," he clarified. "About Eli and Noah." Lena set the knife down and braced her hands on the cutting board. Her shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. "I almost did," she said. "Twice. Once when I was 6 months pregnant and had to walk myself to the hospital because I thought I was going into labor. I sat in the waiting room with my phone in my hand, ready to call you. Then I remembered what you said the night I left." Jeremy closed his eyes. He remembered too. "Don't call me unless it's business." "I was scared," she continued. "Not just of being alone, but of hearing you tell me they weren't real, that you didn't believe me. Again." "I didn't know what to believe back then," he admitted. "I was angry and stupid. And successful," she added, not cruelly. "You became exactly who you said you would, and I became the woman stirring soup to pay the rent." "That soup is incredible," he said, attempting a smile. She didn't laugh. She just looked at him, really looked. "You built an empire," she said slowly, "while I taught them how to share one pair of sneakers between basketball and gym class." Jeremy swallowed hard. "Let me fix it. You can't just throw money at this." "I don't want to throw money," he said, his voice low. "I want to show up, the way I should have. I want to earn them, earn you." Lena leaned back against the counter, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Then wash the silverware," she said finally. "And don't forget the side trays. We're short for lunch rush tomorrow." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. Jeremy nodded and grabbed a rag. That night, as he walked home through the dim streets of the city, the wind biting at his cheeks, he didn't feel like the CEO of a national food delivery company. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance and understood just how rare that was. The next morning, he returned early. The sidewalk hadn't been swept yet, and Lena's kitchen still smelled like last night's grease and warm bread. But Jeremy Wolf smiled. Because inside, somewhere between the dented stove and the mismatched chairs, lived a quiet miracle he wasn't ready to let go of again. By the end of the second week, the regulars at Lena's kitchen had stopped asking who Jeremy was. Some assumed he was a new line cook, others whispered about him being a friend from long ago, but Lena never offered an explanation, and Jeremy never gave one. He just worked. He wiped down counters, took out trash, sliced vegetables with more enthusiasm than accuracy. And every night, after the last order went out and the kitchen quieted, he waited for Lena to speak first. Sometimes she didn't. Until one Thursday evening, after a late dinner rush, she finally did. "I used to imagine you walking through that door," Lena said, not looking at him. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she poured the last of the soup into a container. "Years ago, I thought maybe one day you'd walk in, say you'd made a mistake, that we could try again." Jeremy froze. He was restocking the spice rack, but her words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. "I would have said yes," she added, finally glancing his way, "back then." He turned slowly, heart pounding. "Lena," he started, unsure how to navigate the weight of everything she'd just said. "I don't need apologies," she interrupted, gently but firmly. "I got good at surviving without them, but I do need to understand one thing." She stepped closer, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes locked with his. "You disappeared, Jeremy. Not just from me, but from everything. The day I told you I was pregnant, you left, like I was some mistake you couldn't afford to admit. So tell me, why?" Jeremy's voice caught in his throat. He had prepared for this moment, but not like this. Not when her voice cracked just slightly at the end. Not when her hands gripped the edge of the counter like she was holding herself together. "I was terrified," he admitted. I thought you were lying." Lena flinched just barely. "Every doctor told me it was impossible, that I'd never have kids. I clung to that because it meant I didn't have to face how much I wanted it, how much I wanted you. And when you said you were pregnant, I thought it was some twisted way to keep me from walking away. I wasn't trying to keep you," she said, voice taut. "I was asking you to stay." "I know," he said quietly, "but I couldn't see it. I'd been building this company like it was my only purpose, and I let that version of me, the CEO, the brand, the name, decide what mattered. I let him make the call to push you away." Lena's eyes shimmered. "And now?" He took a breath. "Now, I'd give away everything I built if it meant getting back to that moment and doing it differently." The silence between them deepened. Then Lena laughed, not joyfully, but bitterly. "Time doesn't work like that, Jeremy. I know," he said again, softer, "but maybe you and I do." Lena stared at him for a long time. Her gaze was no longer cold, just exhausted. "I stayed," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I stayed in this city. I kept the name. I raised our sons. You vanished. And when I needed one reason, just one, to believe I hadn't made a mistake, you didn't call. You didn't show up. You disappeared the day I needed a reason to stay." The words landed like a slap. "I'm sorry," Jeremy whispered, his throat thick. "I can't undo that, but I'm here now, and I'll keep showing up every single day until you believe that I mean it." Lena exhaled, setting the soup container aside. Her face softened slightly, not with forgiveness, but with acknowledgement. "They ask about you," she said after a moment. "Not directly, but they wonder why they don't have a dad like other kids." Jeremy stepped closer. "Let me talk to them." "Not yet," Lena said. "They don't know who you are. They think you're just helping around the kitchen, and honestly, I don't think they're wrong." The honesty stung, but Jeremy nodded. "Then I'll be the best kitchen help you've ever had." For the first time, Lena smiled. Just barely, but it was real. Good, because the dish pit's full, and I'm off the clock. She tossed him a towel and turned toward the back room. Welcome to the dinner shift. As Jeremy scrubbed plates under flickering fluorescent lights, the grime on his hands felt oddly symbolic. Maybe redemption didn't start with grand gestures. Maybe it started with a sink full of dishes, a second chance, and a woman who hadn't stopped being brave, no matter how much he'd let her down. He was beginning to understand that Lena didn't need a millionaire. She needed the man who should have stood beside her from the very beginning. And Jeremy Wolf? He was ready to become him. The next evening, Jeremy arrived earlier than usual. Lena wasn't expecting him until 6, but something inside him had shifted after their conversation in the kitchen. He didn't want to just show up. He wanted to be present. To earn trust, not just from Lena, but from the 2 boys who didn't even know he was their father. The tiny bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside Lena's kitchen. The scent of rosemary chicken and warm cornbread greeted him like a memory. In the back, he could hear clattering pans and the occasional burst of laughter. He followed the sound and froze in the doorway of the prep room. 2 identical boys, no more than 8 or 9, were stacking takeout containers with assembly line precision. One of them, he thought it might be the quieter twin, was carefully drawing smiley faces on each paper bag in black marker. The other was offering enthusiastic commentary on the customer of the day, complete with wild hand gestures and imitations. "That's Nathan," Lena's voice came from beside him. "The one drawing is Eli. They rotate jobs. Today's delivery day." Jeremy turned, heart thudding in his chest. They help every day? "Every day since they were tall enough to reach the counter," she said, folding her arms. "Not because I asked them to, because they wanted to. They think this restaurant is magic," and swallowed hard. "It is." Lena studied him quietly for a moment. Then, without warning, she asked, "Are you ready to tell them?" Jeremy's breath caught. "Do they even know about me? That there was someone before?" "I never used your name," she said calmly. "When they asked, I said their father was someone I once loved very much, but he couldn't be there. I didn't want to fill them with resentment. But no, I never said you were dead either, just absent." The word sat like a stone between them. Jeremy stepped into the room. The boys looked up. Nathan gave a curious nod of recognition. "Hey, you're the guy who cut his thumb trying to peel carrots last week," he grinned. Jeremy chuckled. "Guilty." "You back to ruin more vegetables?" Eli teased, but his smile was gentle. Jeremy glanced at Lena, who gave the smallest nod. It was time. "Actually, I was hoping I could join you guys today. Maybe ride along for a delivery?" The twins exchanged glances, identical flickers of curiosity and suspicion, but it was Nathan who shrugged and said, "Sure, we always take 2 orders at once. You can carry one if you don't get us lost." Eli snorted. "He probably uses GPS for everything." Jeremy grinned. "I do, but I can follow you 2 if you lead the way." A few minutes later, the 3 of them were out the door. The sun was beginning to dip, painting golden slants across the sidewalk. Nathan rode his scooter while Eli walked beside Jeremy, still holding the bag with a firm grip. As they waited for the crosswalk, Eli looked up. "You're not just a kitchen guy, are you?" Jeremy hesitated. "No, I run a company." "What kind of company?" "One that delivers food, all kinds, all across the country." Nathan, listening from his scooter, turned around. "Wait, like an app?" Jeremy nodded. "Yeah, it started small, but now it's big. Lots of employees, trucks, drivers." "Then why are you working with us?" Eli asked, blunt as ever. Jeremy thought for a second. "Because sometimes you build something big and forget what matters most. And then, one day, something reminds you." Eli blinked. "That's weirdly deep." Jeremy laughed. "You sound like your mom." They made the delivery, an elderly man who insisted on tipping them extra, and on the walk back, Nathan spoke up. You really like our mom, huh? The question caught Jeremy off guard. I do, he said honestly. She doesn't let many people in, Nathan said quietly, wheeling his scooter beside him. Not even us, sometimes. Jeremy's chest ached. That's because she's had to be strong for a long time. Eli kicked a loose pebble ahead. She cries in the pantry sometimes. She thinks we don't know. Jeremy's throat tightened. But we hear her, Nathan added. We just pretend we don't. Jeremy stopped walking. Hey, he said gently, kneeling between them. Your mom is one of the bravest people I've ever known, and whatever she's been through, it was never because of you. The boys didn't answer right away. Then Eli said, You talk like someone who knows her really well. Jeremy met his eyes. I do. As they returned to the restaurant, Lena waited by the door. Her gaze flicked from their faces to Jeremy's and back again. They were perfect, he said, nodding toward the boys, and fast. Lena gave a small smile. They take it seriously. Later that night, as Jeremy helped wipe down tables, Lena approached him quietly. What did you say to them? He looked up, his expression raw. Not everything, but enough. They're smart. They feel more than they say. Lena nodded slowly. They always have. He set the rag down. Lena, they don't need a CEO. She looked up, confused. Jeremy's voice broke slightly. They need a father. And in that moment, Lena's guarded heart flinched, because maybe, just maybe this time, he meant it. By the end of that week, Jeremy wasn't just showing up early, he was staying late. Every evening, after board meetings and logistics calls, he'd shed his blazer, roll up his sleeves, and step behind the counter at Lena's kitchen. Sometimes he'd scrub dishes, other times he'd chop vegetables or refill condiment bottles. He didn't ask for praise or recognition. He just worked. It was the quiet moments that got to him most. The way Eli hummed while restocking utensils. The way Nathan danced as he cleaned the floor with exaggerated mop strokes. They didn't know they were being watched, but Jeremy watched anyway. Because he had missed years, and now every ordinary second felt like gold. One Thursday evening, as the last takeout order went out the door, Lena leaned against the doorway of the kitchen and crossed her arms. You're getting better at the prep work, she said, a hint of teasing in her voice. Jeremy wiped his hands on a towel and grinned. Are you saying I've been promoted from dish duty? You're being considered for sous chef, she said playfully. Though the jury's still out. He laughed quietly, but his expression sobered a moment later. Do you remember the chicken pot pie you used to make when we first dated? Lena raised an eyebrow. Of course I do. You said it was better than your grandmother's, which I'm still convinced was a line. It wasn't, he said. I haven't stopped thinking about it since the day it arrived at my office. She nodded slowly, her gaze softening. That recipe's never left my menu. I'd like to learn it, he said. Lena blinked. You want to cook it? Jeremy's voice was quiet but steady. I want to understand it. Understand you. Something in her chest tightened, but she didn't show it. Instead, she turned and grabbed a worn, stained recipe card from a drawer. Then let's get started. For the next 2 hours, Jeremy followed every instruction. He diced onions until his eyes watered, kneaded dough until his arms ached, and asked questions not just about technique, but memory. Why thyme and not parsley? When did you first make this for the boys? What's the secret to that golden crust? Lena answered each one, her voice rich with emotion. The secret, she said finally, is patience. You have to give it time. Let it rest. Let it breathe. Rushing it ruins everything. Jeremy looked at her. Not at the ingredients, not at the stove, but her. I ruined it once, he said softly. I rushed away from you, from what mattered. Lena's lips parted slightly, but she didn't reply. Instead, she turned back to the oven. When the timer dinged and the aroma of flaky pastry and simmered chicken filled the kitchen, Jeremy looked like he might cry. Lena cut a piece, plated it, and handed it to him silently. He took a bite. "I remember this taste," he murmured, "but I didn't realize it held so much more." Just then, the back door opened and Eli poked his head in. "Something smells amazing." Lena gestured him over. "Come taste what Jeremy made." Eli's eyes widened. "You cooked this?" Jeremy offered him a fork. "With your mom's guidance." The boy took a bite, then blinked. "It's good," he said, clearly surprised. "Like, actually good." Nathan joined them seconds later, stealing a bite off his brother's plate. "Not bad for a CEO." Jeremy laughed. "High praise." They sat in the kitchen together, sharing a pie and passing stories. Lena watched from the sink, quiet but content. And for a moment it felt like a family, not a broken past trying to heal, but something whole and slowly forming. Later, after the boys had gone to bed and the last light had been turned off, Lena walked Jeremy to the door. The silence was comfortable now, charged with meaning instead of distance. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" she asked. Jeremy looked at her, voice steady. "I'm not here to play house, Lena. I'm not trying to make up for years in a few weeks. But I am here, and I want to stay." She hesitated, then said, "You know this isn't just about me, or them. It's about you too. Can you live without the meetings, the power, the empire?" "I can live without an empire," he said gently, "but I can't live without knowing my sons." Lena nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. "Then start with breakfast tomorrow. Pancakes. They always burn the first one." Jeremy smiled. "I'll be there, ready to burn a whole batch if that's what it takes." And as he stepped out into the cool night air, Jeremy Wolf, once the king of fast food logistics, realized he'd finally found a place where time wasn't something to race, but something to earn. And the kitchen, with all its mess and warmth, was exactly where he was meant to begin. By Monday morning, Jeremy Wolf walked into his corporate headquarters carrying the scent of homemade syrup and a faint smear of pancake batter on his cuff. The boardroom, however, had no appetite for sweetness. "Jeremy, we need to talk. Now." Dylan Groves, one of the company's largest shareholders and a man known for smiling only during quarterly earnings calls, stood at the head of the long conference table, arms crossed. Around him sat a dozen executives, all equally tense. Jeremy dropped his briefcase onto the table and sat. "I'm here. Say what you need to say." Dylan didn't hesitate. "We're receiving complaints from franchise owners in the tri-state area. They claim you're using the internal delivery app to promote a private restaurant." Jeremy didn't blink. "Lena's Kitchen. You admit it?" Another board member, a younger woman named Elise, asked, incredulous. "I do," Jeremy said calmly. "It wasn't intentional at first. I ordered dinner during a system test and her food arrived. The rest evolved." "Jeremy, you used proprietary data to drive traffic to a personal venture," Dylan said, his voice rising with frustration. "That's a conflict of interest and you know it." "I didn't reroute business to her. I simply showed up and worked the line. I haven't taken a dime, haven't used any company funds. You've just lost your objectivity," Elise interrupted, "and possibly your credibility." Jeremy exhaled slowly. "I get it. This looks messy, but I found something worth my time outside these walls, something I walked away from years ago. Her name is Lena, and those two boys, they're my sons." A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. "You're saying—" Dylan leaned back, visibly shaken. "I'm saying I've been gone too long from the only thing that ever mattered," Jeremy said quietly, "and for the first time in my life, I'm trying to get it right." Elise softened slightly. "Then maybe it's time we talk about your future with Wolf Drop." Jeremy nodded. "I agree. But let's finish the quarter. I owe it that much." The meeting adjourned with murmurs and exchanged glances. Jeremy knew the writing was on the wall, but he felt lighter leaving that room than he had walking in. That night, Lena's kitchen was closed for dine-in. The boys had finished their homework early, and Lena was prepping ingredients while Jeremy peeled potatoes with surprising focus. "You told them," Lena said, glancing at him from over the cutting board. Jeremy looked up. "I did." "And?" They weren't thrilled, but they weren't cruel either. Just corporate. Lena smiled faintly. "You sound almost relieved." "I'm not afraid of losing that world anymore," Jeremy said. "I'm afraid of losing this one." He placed a peeled potato on the counter, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" Lena nodded. "Why didn't you call me all those years ago? Why didn't you tell me about them?" She set her knife down. Her voice was soft but steady. "Because you were already gone, Jeremy. I stood in that tiny kitchen waiting for a call, a sign, anything, but all I got was silence. And eventually, I stopped hoping." Jeremy swallowed hard. "I would have come back if I'd known." She looked at him, eyes shining. "Would you have stayed?" The question sat between them like a ghost. Jeremy's voice cracked. "I don't know. Back then, I was too obsessed with building a legacy to realize what I was destroying." Lena stepped closer. "And now?" He looked at her, eyes full of regret and something deeper. "Now, I'd give everything just to be there for a school pickup, to be the reason they roll their eyes because I made too many dad jokes." Lena smiled through her sadness. "You're getting there." At that moment, Eli walked in, his face serious. "Mom?" "Yes, honey? We got an email from the school. There's a family heritage project. We have to make a board about where we come from." Jeremy froze. Nathan entered behind his brother, clearly having heard the same thing. "Can we use pictures from the restaurant?" Eli added. "Do we have any baby pictures? Of Dad?" Jeremy knelt between them, his heart in his throat. I might have one or two. Would that be okay?" The boys exchanged a glance, then Eli shrugged. "It's your face. Might as well use it." Nathan nodded. "But we get to decide where you go on the board." "Fair enough," Jeremy said, smiling. Lena watched the scene quietly, her heart tugging in two directions, fear and hope, but mostly hope. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Jeremy stepped outside to the alley behind Lena's kitchen. The night was quiet. A soft drizzle misted the pavement. He stared up at the sky, breathing deeply, grateful for the scent of garlic and rain. His phone buzzed. A message from Elise. "Let's schedule a transition meeting next week. Whatever's next, we want it to go smoothly." Jeremy typed back, "Thank you. I'm exactly where I need to be." Then he looked back at the restaurant. Warm light glowing through the windows, the woman he'd never stopped loving cleaning up the remnants of dinner, and upstairs, the two boys whose laughter now defined his purpose. He wasn't losing a company. He was gaining a life. And it tasted better than any empire ever had. The storm hit just after noon, an unseasonal downpour that soaked the city in minutes. Traffic snarled, umbrellas flipped inside out, and the sky darkened like a curtain had fallen over Manhattan. But inside Lena's kitchen, warmth radiated from more than just the ovens. Jeremy stood at the sink, elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing pans while music played softly in the background. The lunch rush had passed, but the lingering clatter of dishes and soft murmur of voices gave the little restaurant a heartbeat. Nathan peeked through the kitchen doorway, his voice curious. "What's a bechamel?" Jeremy grinned. "Cream sauce, buddy. Fancy name for milk, flour, butter, and patience." "Sounds gross," Eli chimed in, nose wrinkling as he walked in with a damp paper bag of ingredients Lena had asked them to grab from the corner store. "You'd be surprised," Jeremy replied. "Sometimes the best things start out weird." Lena looked up from the stove, her eyes meeting Jeremy's. "Like us," she said softly. Jeremy paused mid-scrub. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just like us." The boys ducked out again, giggling about something that involved flour and a dare. Once they were gone, Lena turned serious. "What happened at the board meeting?" Jeremy sighed, drying his hands with a towel. "They want me to step down." She didn't look shocked. "Are you?" "I think I already have," he said simply. "I haven't really been there in weeks, not the way they expect me to be." He leaned against the counter. "It's funny. I built that company from the ground up, and now I'm standing in a kitchen arguing with a 9-year-old about parsley and feeling more alive than I ever did on a conference call." Lena stirred the pot in front of her, quietly contemplative. "You're changing." "I think I already changed," Jeremy said. "I just needed something to show me who I actually wanted to be." Lena looked at him then, really looked at him. "And who's that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved beside her, gently stirring the pot where she'd left off. Someone worth forgiving. Someone who doesn't walk away this time. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, something between them softened. That night, after the restaurant had closed and the boys were tucked upstairs reading comics in their bunk beds, Jeremy and Lena sat at a small table with 2 bowls of soup and a bottle of wine Jeremy had brought from his private collection. Lena raised an eyebrow. "This is probably worth more than the stove." "Then it deserves to be opened somewhere it matters," he said with a half-smile. They clinked glasses, the moment lingering. Lena tilted her head, her voice gentle. "Why did you walk away back then, Jeremy? Not just from me, but from everything soft?" Jeremy stared at the candle between them, the flickering flame dancing in his eyes. "Because soft felt like weakness. I thought if I leaned into it, I'd lose my edge. And if I lost my edge, I'd lose everything else." He met her gaze. "Turns out, I was wrong. All I lost was you. And now, maybe I'm hoping this restaurant, this chaos, these 2 miracle boys, maybe they're my way back." Lena's expression flickered with something unreadable. Hope, fear, maybe both. "You don't get to erase 9 years with a few loads of dishes and a good wine pairing." "I know," Jeremy said quietly, "but I'm not trying to erase it. I'm trying to build something new from what's left." Lena looked away, swallowing emotion. "You think it's that simple?" "No," he replied, "but I think it's worth trying." There was a knock on the restaurant's front door. It was nearly 10 p.m. Jeremy stood, confused. Lena followed. Outside stood an elderly woman with a cane, wrapped in a plastic poncho. Her smile was kind, but uncertain. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said through the glass. I saw the light. "Is this still Lena's kitchen?" Lena opened the door, greeting her with a warmth that could cut through any storm. "Yes, it is. Can I help you? I used to eat here every Friday, back when your mama owned it. Before the fire, before all the changes. I was walking by and wondered if there was any pie left." Jeremy looked at Lena. Without a word, she smiled and ushered the woman in. 10 minutes later, the 3 of them sat at the same table Jeremy had just shared with Lena, the old woman sighing happily as she tasted the familiar chicken pot pie. "It's exactly how I remember it," she said, her voice trembling. "This place. It feels like a home someone left a light on for." Lena glanced at Jeremy, and for the first time that night, he said nothing at all. Because some things didn't need words, they just needed to be felt, to be shared, to be forgiven. And in the quiet hum of a rainy night, surrounded by warmth, spice, and second chances, Jeremy Wolf realized he hadn't found a restaurant. He'd found his way back home. The sun had just begun to dip below the skyline, casting golden rays across the small windows of Lena's kitchen. Inside, the space buzzed with a different energy than usual. An almost electric anticipation crackled in the air. Jeremy stood by the prep table, adjusting the collar of his white apron. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his hands were already dusted with flour. Lena moved behind him, her focus sharp, her movements graceful as she seasoned the lamb stew simmering on the stove. Nathan and Eli were upstairs, carefully placing handmade signs on tables that read, "Tonight's special, on the house, made with love." "Full house?" Jeremy asked without looking away from the dough he was kneading. "Reservations filled in 2 hours," Lena replied. "Your marketing team is good." He smiled slightly. "I only asked them to help design the flyers. The rest, people talking, remembering, hoping, was all you and your food." She didn't respond, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It had started as an impulsive idea. Jeremy wanted to give something back, to the community, to Lena, and most of all to the boys. So he pitched a one-night-only event, family night at Lena's kitchen. Free meals for neighbors, co-workers, delivery staff, and friends. Jeremy's former company even footed the cost quietly through a fund he'd created just for this evening. He hoped the gesture would be enough to say what he hadn't yet found the words for. The doorbell jingled. Guests began to arrive. Jeremy wiped his hands and headed to the front, where Nathan and Eli stood beaming in their matching bow ties, an idea they'd insisted on. "Welcome to Lena's kitchen," Nathan announced cheerfully. "Would you like sweet tea or lemonade?" Jeremy knelt beside the boys. "You two are naturals." Eli tugged on his sleeve. "Can we do this every week?" Jeremy smiled, his heart swelling. "We'll see. But tonight, let's make it count." As tables filled with laughter, clinking silverware, and warm conversations, Jeremy moved between the dining area and the kitchen. He plated dishes under Lena's watchful eye, fetched bread baskets, refilled drinks, and even took orders with a Sharpie when pens ran out. It was chaotic, exhausting. It was perfect. At one point, Lena stepped out to greet a table of elderly women who'd once known her mother. Jeremy found himself alone in the kitchen, stirring a pot of mushroom risotto when Eli appeared beside him. "Hey, Dad!" The word made him freeze. Eli seemed unaware of the magnitude. He was focused on something else entirely. He held up a crookedly folded piece of paper. "I made this during break." Jeremy dried his hands quickly and took the paper, unfolding it carefully. It was a drawing. Stick figures of 4 people holding hands. Nathan, Eli, Lena, and him. Above their heads were balloons, and a sign in a crayon that read, "Our Family Night." Jeremy looked down, his throat tightening. "You did this for me?" Eli nodded. "You made tonight feel like we all belonged somewhere. That's family, right?" Jeremy knelt, pulling the boy into a hug, his voice hushed and raw. "Yeah, buddy, that's exactly what it is." Lena returned just in time to see them embrace. She paused, the sight hitting her with unexpected force. For a long time she'd believed she was enough for the boys, and she had been. But tonight, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to want, what it looked like when the people you love stop surviving and start thriving. As the night wound down, guests began to trickle out, many of them leaving handwritten notes of thanks or whispered words about how good it was to feel something real again. Jeremy stood beside Lena at the door, waving goodbye, the tiredness in his body overcome by a peaceful joy. "You pulled this off," she murmured. "You really did." "We did," he corrected gently. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." Lena looked up at him, eyes softening. "Maybe you're not the same man who walked away years ago." He took her hand slowly. "I hope not. That guy didn't know what he had." Just then, Nathan and Eli ran up, each holding a paper crown fashioned from to-go menus. "We're crowning the chefs," Nathan declared. Jeremy laughed. "Oh? And what's the prize?" Eli beamed. "Best dinner ever. Forever." Lena knelt beside them, allowing them to place the makeshift crown on her head. Jeremy followed suit. The boys clapped. Jeremy leaned close to Lena and whispered, "Let's make this our thing. Every year. A tradition." Lena looked at him, really looked, and in that glance something unspoken was understood. This wasn't a one-time redemption arc. This was a beginning. As they turned out the lights and stepped into the night, the warm hum of love and second chances echoed behind them, and tomorrow they'd rise with flower on their hands and new dreams in their hearts, together. The following morning, Jeremy Wolf stood outside Lena's kitchen, sleeves rolled up, the early spring breeze brushing against his arms as he unlocked the front door. The smell of flower and rosemary still lingered faintly in the air from the night before, but what struck him most was the note taped to the inside of the glass. "Thanks for reminding us what community feels like. The Jenkins family." His fingers hovered over the message. One night. That was all it took to make people believe again, in food, in connection, in something worth holding on to. Inside, Lena was already setting up, her hair in a loose braid, apron dusted with powdered sugar. "Did you sleep?" she asked without looking up. "Barely," he admitted with a tired grin. "My mind kept replaying Eli's drawing. I've stared down billion-dollar valuations with less emotion." Lena chuckled softly. "He's got a way of getting to people." "So do you," Jeremy added gently. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for a mixing bowl, her movements steady, practiced. "The boys are still talking about last night. They said it felt like Christmas." Jeremy's voice dropped. "I want that feeling to last." She paused. "Not just for one night," he continued, moving closer, "but for the rest of their lives. For hours." Lena's hand stilled on the countertop. "Jeremy." "I know," he said quickly. "We haven't had time to talk about what this all means, but I've been thinking. I can't go back to who I was before. I don't want to. Last night I saw my sons laugh with strangers. I saw you smile at me like we never ran out of time." She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what happens when real life crashes in again? When your world calls you back? Investors, lawsuits, mergers?" Jeremy stepped forward, placing his hands gently on the counter between them. "I walked away from Lena's kitchen once, thinking ambition was all I needed. But now, every time I look at you, at them, I realize I left the best recipe behind." She searched his face for hesitation, but all she saw was sincerity, and something deeper than longing, resolve. "Then what are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying," he said, voice catching slightly, "I want to start over. Not just here, everywhere. I sold my shares in the company this morning." Lena's eyes widened. "What?" "I made the decision months ago," he explained. "But after last night I signed the final paperwork. I'm out. No more boardrooms, no more midnight flights. Just here, with you, with Nathan and Eli. I want to build something with heart, something real." The words hung in the air, fragile and full. Lena leaned back, stunned. "You sold Wolf Logistics?" He nodded. "And I've already filed paperwork to open something new, a culinary arts academy, scholarships for kids from low-income homes, job training, guest chefs, you, if you'll join me." Emotion welled in Lena's eyes, unspoken memories rushing back, of long nights spent dreaming over cheap wine, her scribbled sketches of a teaching kitchen, a bakery window lined with her mother's recipes. She never thought anyone remembered. "I'd have to think about it," she said finally, voice thick. "Take all the time you need," he whispered. A moment passed between them, stretched taut with everything they hadn't said over the years. Then a door slammed upstairs, followed by quick feet tumbling down. "Mom!" Nathan yelled, rounding the corner. "It's here! It came!" "What came?" Jeremy asked as both boys rushed in, a large envelope flapping in Nathan's hand. "The letter," Eli beamed, "from the culinary school you helped us apply to." Jeremy blinked. "You applied to culinary school?" Lena nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "It was their idea. They wanted to start early. Weekend programs for youth chefs. Eli tore open the envelope, reading the letter aloud with trembling hands. Dear Nathan and Eli Wolf, congratulations! You've both been accepted to the Youth Culinary Scholars Program. Jeremy's knees nearly buckled. They used my last name, he whispered. Lena's voice cracked. They asked if it was okay. I told them it was their choice. And we chose it, Nathan said, looking up at him, because now we know who our dad is. Jeremy dropped to one knee, arms open, and the boys flung themselves into his embrace. The four of them held each other tightly as the morning light spilled in. From the counter, Lena watched through tears. Jeremy looked up at her, still holding the boys, and said softly, This is everything. She stepped closer, finally letting herself believe it. Yes, she whispered, voice breaking. Yes, it is. Outside, the world continued rushing forward. Deliveries, deadlines, city sounds. But inside Lena's kitchen, time stood still, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. 10 candles flickered atop a homemade chocolate cake, their soft glow illuminating the quiet joy spread across the faces gathered around the table. Jeremy stood back for a moment, taking in the scene before him. Nathan and Eli practically vibrating with excitement, Lena beaming as she adjusted one of the boys' collars, and the cozy, warmly lit kitchen filled with the sound of laughter and clinking plates. "All right, boys," Lena said, clapping her hands gently. "Make a wish." "No peeking, Dad," Nathan warned, scrunching his eyes shut. "I wouldn't dare," Jeremy replied, hand on his heart. The boys inhaled, held their breath for a single moment filled with silent hope, and blew out the candles together in one synchronized gust. A cheer erupted from the small group of family friends and neighbors who had gathered. Regulars from the restaurant, the mailman who always asked about the boys, and even Rosa from the diner across the street. Eli looked up from the cake and grinned at Jeremy. "Want to see your present?" "Do I?" Jeremy asked with mock suspense, eyes wide. Nathan ran to the corner, rifled through a stack of wrapped gifts, and returned with a small box wrapped in blue paper and sealed with a piece of tape that clearly read, "Dad only." Jeremy chuckled and carefully peeled the wrapping away, revealing a simple apron folded neatly inside. Embroidered across the chest in uneven, loving stitches were the words, "Our favorite recipe. Dad plus Mom plus us equal forever." His breath caught. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then, slowly, he pulled the apron over his head and tied the strings around his waist with deliberate reverence. The boys whooped, and Lena covered her mouth with her fingers, tears glistening in her eyes. "You guys made this?" he asked, voice thick. "Eli picked the thread," Nathan said proudly, "and I helped sew the letters." Jeremy bent down, arms wide, and they rushed into his embrace without hesitation. Lena joined them, wrapping her arms around all three. In the middle of a small Brooklyn kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of cinnamon and warmth and everything that once felt out of reach, Jeremy Wolf felt something he hadn't in decades. He felt whole. Later that evening, after the guests had trickled out and the kitchen had been restored to its usual tidy charm, Jeremy and Lena found themselves alone on the back porch, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the boys chase lightning bugs in the yard. "They never stop moving," Jeremy mused with a tired laugh. "They're just getting started," Lena replied, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Silence stretched comfortably between them, the kind that needed no filling. After a while, Jeremy shifted and looked at her. "You think we'll get this right?" he asked softly. "The second act?" Lena turned her face toward his, her expression calm and steady. "You're not the same man you were 10 years ago, and I'm not the same woman. That's the best part. We don't have to repeat the past. We get to write something new." He took her hand, threading his fingers with hers. "I want to do more than write it," he murmured. "I want to live it, every day." She smiled, that slow, quiet smile he remembered from the very beginning. "Then let's start tomorrow." Morning light filtered through linen curtains as Jeremy stood at the stove in his new apron, scrambling eggs while the boys set the table. Lena came in wearing one of his flannel shirts, hair still damp from the shower, and stopped to take in the sight. "You're really doing it," she said, leaning on the doorframe. "I told you I'd learn breakfast eventually," he said, grinning. "Even if I still burn the toast?" The boys giggled. "You're getting better," Eli offered generously. After breakfast, the four of them piled into a second-hand SUV Jeremy had proudly picked out himself, seats sticky with juice box residue and seats lined with coloring book pages. They were heading to the farmer's market for fresh herbs and local produce, Lena's idea. Then, later, the culinary youth program would hold its open house, and the boys had prepared a surprise, a mini demo of their now signature chicken pot pie. As the car turned down a familiar street, Jeremy glanced into the rearview mirror at the two faces smiling back at him, faces that mirrored his own in the best ways possible. He met Lena's eyes beside him and reached for her hand. In a world that once measured his worth by stock prices, subscriber counts, and growth charts, he now measured success by the laughter echoing from the back seat and the hand he held beside him. He had once built an empire to feed the world. Now, he was building a home to feed the soul. And, with every new recipe, every bedtime story, every shared meal, he was discovering a truth more powerful than anything he'd ever known. Love, like food, was best when made from scratch and served warm.